Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 3 of the Tactical Cyber Podcast. If you've been on any of the previous podcasts, I did a much better job introing that one as opposed to not screwing up the technical part. So we got that going for us, which is nice. For those of you watching on LinkedIn or YouTube, thanks so much. If you have thoughts or questions as this goes on, feel free to pop them in there. If I did it right, they will come into my StreamYard feed. If they're not, I'll see it and I'll bring it up. But I want to welcome in my co-host from Birmingham, Paul Perry. Paul, welcome.
Hey, Darren. Good to be back. Good to be with everybody for another good podcast. Looking forward to this discussion.
Sure. Yeah. And as always, thanks so much for taking the time from your busy day to pop in here. And one thing I will note that Paul has a little bit of a delay. So if there's a little lag between me talking and him talking, it's a StreamYard issue. It's not our issue. So we'll try to figure that out by the next time. But, what are you going to do? So we do have a special guest. We'll bring him in a little bit. We're going to talk the news stuff here real quick. But this particular episode is focused specifically on tactical solutions for the home. Now, this may mean a little bit of, from a control perspective, how do you do what you do with your routers, how to create a network that's safe. But it's really going to be more focused on having those tough conversations with the people in your family that you want to protect, your kids, the seniors in your lives that really probably don't have the skill set to not become victims online. So Scott's an expert on this. This is kind of his wheelhouse, is talking about those things. So we'll bring him in a little bit. What like we like to do at the beginning here is talk a little bit of cyber news, because since we last spoke, there's been a lot of cyber news. Obviously, I do a podcast 3 days a week talking about cyber news. It's always going on, but I like to get someone else's opinion on those things. So one of the news articles that Paul brought up was from, let me bring up the screen here so we can see it. So this is from the Daily Hodl. JP Morgan Chase Wells Fargo Bank of America refused to reimburse $880 million to customers and are accused of repeated relentless failure to protect victims of fraud. So Paul, talk a little bit about what that means, if it means anything to the banking community, and if you are one of these people that they're not paying back, do you have any recourse?
I mean, I would say, Darren, that it's an interesting article, and it's one of those where you just can't pass it by. You've got to dig into it, and as you read further, it talks about fraudulent transactions as it relates to Zelle transactions from those entities. About $320 million to customers who were hit by unauthorized transactions, another $560 million in potential reimbursements to customers who were tricked into authorizing an illicit transaction. And I think it goes to point out that when it comes to dollars, when it comes to cash, when it comes to money and working with the bank, you've got to be extra sure you know who you're working with. You got to be extra sure you know what you're doing, what transactions are happening. Because if it just keeps happening, they're going to continue to maybe not pay you back. And I think that's the biggest piece when I talk to people from a personal perspective is the bank. If it's your cash, you've got to protect it as much as you can. That's why a lot of people will use credit cards and then just pay off the credit cards, because it's a whole lot easier to try and get back an illicit transaction potentially. So I think this is one of those articles where there's insufficient consumer protection on potentially the Zelle network as it relates to those transactions. So being super careful, I think, is the huge piece here, is just knowing who you're working with, who you're transacting with, and always using whatever controls they have. A lot of people will on anything like a Cash App or anything else that's out there, it's, what are the last 4 digits of the number? And people are like, oh, you don't have to put that in. No, I'm going to put that in every single time because I want to make sure it's inconvenient, as I've talked about before. But articles like this is crazy. This is unreal. So if you're out there, you're using cash, you're using these types of transactions, you just got to be super careful.
Yeah, and obviously, and we'll talk about this with Scott, but as you talk to the seniors in your lives who are just learning to use these apps, and they're finding love online, and being asked to send money to help because there's some, once I finish this job, I can come see you and we can get married, whatever, all that kind of stuff. So we'll talk about Scott, but same idea, right? Is you have to have that conversation with your parents, because the banks, if you go in and you're the account holder and you're saying, I want to wire transfer $50,000, who are they to say no? I mean, we'd like to think that they would say,
right,
well, are you sure you want to do that? But they don't. Like, that's not their job.
Yep. Agreed.
So since we spoke last, CrowdStrike, of course, occurred. And you made a good point that you kind of wanted to touch on this just a little bit, to talk about, for people to understand that CrowdStrike was it was an incident, but it wasn't an incident, right? So I'll let you go off of that intro to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest piece that I've had conversations with people since CrowdStrike happens, they've asked comments or questions about it. I always say, well, look, it's somebody messed up, somebody screwed up, somebody didn't put in a patch the way they should have, or they didn't use controls that they have around change management. That's not necessarily an incident. Now, if it later comes out that somebody did it intentionally, that's a whole different ball game. But on the surface, I think when incidents like CrowdStrike happen, or when incidents like other cyber attacks happen, it's really important to really get into the facts to truly understand, because people are blanket saying, "Oh, it's another incident, it's another cyber attack," when it wasn't. The AT&T one that happened, I don't know, a month or two ago, it's the type of activity or the type of information that was taken is completely different than what you would expect, right? So I think people have to step back, read an article, actually read what it says, and then bucket it into, oh, somebody screwed up, right? Or they took financial information, they took information that can hurt me, or they just took my call logs, right? Right. Those are two different types of incidents. Yes, you want to protect everything, but how you react to those incidences is just as important. And that's why it's important to understand what the incident truly was, so that you can react in the way that you need to, right? From the AT&T perspective, not much you could do to protect that on your side. So you've just really got to understand it. And I think that's the biggest piece, is the misnomer is, if it's a technology issue, people just assume it's a cyber attack when it's not always that way. So read the articles, dig into the details. I think that's extremely important.
And honestly, I wish that the media would do that beforehand, because I was on the news 3 times that day with 3 different news stations talking about this, and you'd have thought the sky was falling. I said, look, it's a unicorn event.
Right,
it's unfortunate it occurred, but they didn't test their software. What do you want? I mean, what do you look?
And
what are you hoping
you did
for
a great job.
You
did a great job.
That's
Right.
what I was looking for. Little affirmation. All right, one more, and then we'll get to Scott. This one is is because of the topic of today. This one is from Tom's Guide. It's actually, he links it from a Bleeping Computer article, but 4.3 million people hit in a massive healthcare data breach, full names, addresses, and social security numbers exposed online. So if you get your HSA, your health savings account, through Health Equity, you can expect a letter in the mail with a free year of data monitoring or credit monitoring, because your data has been compromised. So again, this is, and I said this on LinkedIn, I said it flippantly, because all you can do now is just be flippant with these things. Is, here we go again, and this is why we can't have nice things, is because I would think, correct me if I'm wrong, you're kind of more in the industry in this than I am. I would think that this particular company, Health Equity, has money, equities in their name, to be able to do cybersecurity right. Well, you would think, right? But here we are.
It never stops. And that's the thing, is there's so many things out there that companies can do, right? And they choose and they pick and they say, okay, we're going to spend our money here. Some people say we're not going to spend our money until something happens. It's the way wrong decision. But yeah, I mean, it's one little piece. And if there are 47 things you should be doing from a controls perspective as an organization, and you only do 46, and the bad guys find number 47, you did everything you could, right? And so it's, yeah, you've got to do it all. And it's just going to keep coming and coming.
And we won't get a postmortem that says, here's how they got in. So then we would know which of those 47 went wrong, which probably someone clicking a link.
Right. Right.
And if you want more quality news like this, the Cyber Smart Morning News Update will have all of these articles in more detail on the Wednesday edition. So look for it on all your favorite podcast platforms, if you're so inclined. So with that, let's get into why we're here to talk about tactical solutions for the home. Let me stop sharing that screen, and let's bring in our guest. Retired FBI Supervisory Special Agent and author of the book, The Secrets to Cybersecurity, or is it The Secret? I would get that wrong every time. I have a signed copy. You think I know. Scott Augenbaum, and I like to say Cyber Speaker Extraordinaire, Scott Augenbaum. Scott, thanks for taking the time, as always.
Hey, Darren. Hey, Paul. Darren, is this the appropriate platform that I could make my apology to the people on the airplane when I whispered my 55-second video on how to keep people safe?
Well, give a little context. All right, we talked about this last night, but so if you follow Scott on LinkedIn, he's got a lot of stuff that he does with video. He does a lot of videos because he's got a face for video. I have a face for radio. He's got a face for video, so that's why he's on video.
Paul, I have this crazy concept where I like to help people. I don't care about companies. I'm going to be honest. I mean, I just see companies. I've been preaching to the choir for decades as an FBI agent. I've just given up. I mean, go ahead, listen. Whatever you're going to do with my data, do it. So I try to provide people like keeping families safe. So I'm on the airplane and I just said, hey, this is a pretty good idea. Let me just take a recording of myself. There's nobody sitting next to me. I kind of whisper and I'm like, hey, everyone, I'm looking into my camera and I do this video and I give 4 tips. I'm like, okay, use a VPN, don't use free Wi-Fi. Make sure that if you can, shut your Bluetooth off. Make sure you're shutting your AirDrop off. And there was one other one. And don't charge your phone. Use a charger. So I dropped this video on a Saturday, and Darren and I are always talking about algorithms and LinkedIn. Nothing ever makes sense. But the next thing I know is like 2 days, I get 150,000 views, a ton of positive comments. But a couple of the comments that came out, one was funny. One said, I'd rather sit next to a crying baby than a guy filming content on a plane. Comedy, I thought that was awesome. I thought that was funny. But a couple of people did say that I was violating other people's privacy. And as someone from information security, I should know better. So I'd like to tell them I'd like to offer them an apology on your platform.
There you go. So I'm sure they're watching, and so they'll probably get back to them. So so from a technical perspective, I am getting the comments to show up. So I do want to show one comment here. This goes back to the news piece. So I'm going to jump in front of you here, Scott. But this is Alfred Parkinson. Security is always the last place a company wants to spend money, and that's absolutely right. And you know why? Because it doesn't make the company money. That's why. And they don't look at the whole annual loss expectancy and all that kind of stuff. They don't do those calculations. But that's why you're right, Alfred. They don't do it. They won't spend it, and it's crazy. So,
well, most people don't, and I mean, when we come to things on the personal side, we will spend money on health, we will spend money on wealth, and we will spend money on relationships. And we all know that it takes a lifetime to earn wealth. And how long does it take for you to lose it because of your Zelle app?
Exactly. I'm sure Russell Brunson is happy you brought that up. All right, so I'm going to we got a question for you, Scott, to start right off, right? Because we're talking about how to keep families safe, how to keep your home safe. What are the solutions for that, right? And so TAB on LinkedIn asked this question: is there such a notion as safe? So let's start there. Is there such a notion as safe?
As I said, in my book, look, if you want to avoid all cybercrime, move to the Arctic, move to one of those islands. But there are ways where we could reduce our chances. Because one of the big concepts that Darren and I have been batting around for years is, look, if a majority of cybercrime victimization easily could have been prevented, why don't we just do these things before we spend a dime on information security? So there are risks that are around. Listen, there's no guarantee that you're going to get in an airplane, and there's no guarantee your airplane's going to go down. There's no guarantee when you drive your car, someone's not going to crash into you. There are risks in life, but there are ways that we could reduce our risks without actually spending money or without actually looking at a check the box list of 7,328 controls and hope we do 7,132 of them. And that's really what I'd love to bat around with you guys and really talk about a couple of simple things that really are the elements. Because, during my time with the FBI, I've dealt with 1,000 cybercrime victims. I identified patterns of victimization. It's not rocket science. I didn't invent any of it. It's just that I looked at it as a giant laboratory to learn. So let's really kind of talk about different ways that we could stay safe. What do you think, guys?
I think it's a great idea. But I think, Scott, also, by the way, longtime listener and glad to have you on this podcast and have a conversation face to face. It's not about always protecting. It's about how you respond when something does happen. And I think people do not always prepare themselves for that response. And so when you do talk about these things today about how to keep themselves safe, it's also about preparing for the response time, because I think that's just as important and should be spent a lot of time doing both.
No, absolutely. I agree with you. But let's just boil down a couple of elements before we go into the response, because you know what my goal is? To put the intrusion response companies out of business. Not in a bad way, but I mean, listen, if 90% of it, I don't want you to have a response. I am building, I am building something for a senior center. I'm building something for a senior center. Why is that? They had one of their clients got a telephone call that appeared to be coming from the administrator saying she was owed back due rent. Okay. So the lady goes to the bank. First bank, she takes out $17,000 in cash. They say, no, we don't want to give you cash. They're doing the right thing. She goes to another bank. She gets it. She meets someone in a parking lot and gives it to them. And now she's out $17,000. Now they're coming up with a response. Oh, no, we got to do something. So let's work together to tighten up these things. Then we can deal with the response. Because I hate to say it, Paul, I get calls all the time from victims. Guy called me up a couple of weeks ago, lost $5.7 million. I'm hospice. I have to remember my active listening skills. I'm not getting his money back. Law enforcement's not putting the bad guys in jail. But if we could go back in time and we can sit with our victims, we could potentially stop a lot of victimizations. But as Darren and I could go on and on, you can only help those who want to help themselves.
Yeah, and one LinkedIn user agrees with this, guys. Awareness is a powerful skill. So, I mean, and it's a skill, right? It's not innate at the end of the day. For at least for cyber stuff, it's not innate. Certain skills can be innate, but from a cyber skill perspective, it is for us now, but it took us 25 years to get here to be able to say it's a skill.
Hey, listen, it's still a mindset. We all need to have that mindset to be able to change the way we do things. And what is having that right mindset? It's not taking that once a month. I mean, my phone's ringing off the hook, Darren. It's Cybersecurity Awareness Month. It's a great time in the Augenbaum household because I get to overcharge large companies. And then I throw in videos, I throw in books, and everyone's like, well, that's not our requirement. We just want you to talk for 45 minutes. And then my wife, Paul, says to me, Scott, shut up. Just take the money. But I'm like, honey, I want to help these people. I want to save them. I feel like, we could do so much. But how do you help a world that really doesn't want to help? I mean, how does that sit with you, Paul, what I just said?
I mean, it doesn't. I mean, culture to me is the biggest piece of not just organizations, but society as a whole. And the culture has to be, we all have to be aware and we all have to do our part to protect. And if not everybody's going to do it, then some people would say, well, then it's not on me, it's on everybody else. And I just don't agree with that. And I, like you, want to change the culture of businesses. I want to change the culture of society. I just want people to understand. And I've always tried to figure out why. And I'd love to hear your thought on why the culture and the mindset is not there. I think part of it is a lack of understanding. I don't understand technology issues personally or within a company, so therefore it's not on me. And I think that's one of the ultimate reasons. I think we choose convenience. I've said that many times over security and privacy.
Security is one.
And changing the culture. We've just got to change the culture. And I think that it takes that awareness that somebody said. It takes what you've talked about. And we've just got to continue beating the drum. And I've said it to others, and I'll say it to you and Darren and anybody else that's fighting the good fight. Thank you for what you're doing. And you just keep doing it.
So let's talk about what I call, in the 4 truths of cybersecurity. The first one, and these are universal truths that I've discovered after interviewing almost 1,000 victims. And even to this day, none of my victims ever expected to be a victim. They didn't think they fit the victim profile. I'm a small business. I'm a nonprofit organization. I'm a sole member LLC law firm. They're obviously going to target big law firms or a small healthcare company. And that, Paul, is what I would think I don't even feel like I need to talk to Darren. I talk to Darren about this all the time. That's why I'm talking to
Come
Paul
on,
today.
bring it on.
Yeah. No, it's just that, it's like until it's too late, their questions are, how did this happen to me? Why did this happen to me? I never thought I would be a victim. And that is something which is a false belief that now when I'm doing presentations, I'm structuring them with more of the psychological implications. So when I need to change behavior within an audience, so I'm doing a live presentation, it fits a very simple framework. I explain the fact that the cybercrime problem keeps getting worse year after year, and we keep spending money. And in law enforcement, we say we're not going to arrest our way out of the problem. You're not going to spend your way out of the problem. So we make in order to change the mindset and change behaviors, we have to establish that. We're not saying don't spend money. Then we're talking about the first truth. I got to get that into someone's head. I got to get them to understand that they could be a victim. And then I make them feel through storytelling, what does it mean when you're a victim? And it's always asking questions. And it doesn't matter if your audience really even understands it. So if I'm going to ask the audience right now, since we're live, have you ever met has a family member or a close friend of yours had all of their money stolen by a cyber criminal? And when we're doing that, and if there's any audiences, members, I mean, I've dealt with 1,000 people. I couldn't get their money back. I couldn't put the bad guys in jail. We're creating a negative loop here. And then I go to my audience and say, I know that sounds pretty bad, but I discovered that 90% of it easily could have been prevented. Will you let me explain to you the 5 or 6 things? And I can get an audience nodding. They pay attention. Now, Darren, do they ever do anything with that information?
Never. You can offer them free stuff and they won't take it.
Yeah.
I do presentations and offer free consulting to their companies. I'll tell you kind of where you need to go, even if you don't talk to me ever again. I've had one little medical practice take me up on it in so many years. I don't know.
You know what's interesting, Darren and Paul? I offer free copies of my book after I'm doing a presentation. I did a presentation in Chicago to 100 physicians' offices. They paid me handsomely to do it. And as part of the engagement, I said, I'll give all of you an audio copy of my book. Just go to my website and sign up for it. And 4 people showed up. 4 people took me up on the offer. They gladly paid. Wow. I mean, they want me to entertain. They want to hear the stories. But everybody wants an easy button. Nobody wants to, unfortunately, like even if I said to you, Paul, I go, hey, Paul, I got this great opportunity. I'm going to give you my 2.5-hour course so you can learn to stay safe. Sounds great. Who the heck has 2.5 hours? So I've been creating micro videos. I've been creating these 60-second videos, and now I've been building them customized for companies, and they all love it. Because I think we live in Darren's favorite company's world, TikTok, and we all love the 60-second videos.
Are you posting to TikTok, by the way? Let me ask that question.
Not yet. I'm thinking about a way of trying to have my son register a company and set it up, and then him stealing the content from me and then putting it up there so I can ethically keep my hands clean of that. Paul, is that a good way? Do you think that works or no?
I don't know. I'm going to have to sleep on that one. I personally am not on it, nor will I be on it. And you got to practice what you preach. And I think that's what you're trying to say, Scott. But don't you think, Scott, let me go back to your second truth and maybe your first one too.
Quinn, post those videos, okay? Come on, keep going.
Don't you think that there's going to be an event that wakes everybody up? Like I've sat back and I've tried to say, does a bank not reimbursing people $880 million not wake people up? Does a bank losing half their deposits not wake people up? There has to be, and maybe I'm just living in a different world, but there has to be an event that changes people's mindset.
Well, first of all, I thought the Target breach.
Mm.
I thought, to me, the Target breach was the watershed moment for us, and then we glossed over that. Then I happen to think the community health systems breach in Nashville, Tennessee, when it's the first time we see the Chinese government get in, and that doesn't happen. And between now and then, people have died in ransomware. I mean, we've shut down hospitals, we've shut down police departments, we've gotten into government services. You tell me. I just think I don't know what do you think, Darren? Every day there's a watershed moment. Yeah, like 9/11, exactly, Alfred.
Well, we keep talking. When is that? I mean, I'm sure at some point, I didn't watch all the news on the CrowdStrike Friday, but I'm sure someone said or asked the question, is this our cyber 9/11? I would wager everything I own that question was, I know, but I'm saying, I bet you someone asked it, right? Someone asked it, but it wasn't. I'm not saying it was, but if there was a book that came out, it was by one of the national security advisors during Bush's time. He thinks very much of himself. But he had this part at the beginning where all these everything happened at once, right? If the power grid goes down and the communications goes down, I guess the big one, people pay attention. I guess if TikTok finally disappears, maybe people pay attention. Maybe.
Richard Clarke's Cyber War.
Richard Clarke, yeah, Cyber War. Thank you. Exactly.
Great book. You know what? It really, I think I just bought it. I think I'm going to read it again because I love to read these things, Paul, about these people who were crying wolf like Darren and I were in 2010. You know what I thought was a watershed moment? I thought when the Chinese government got into Google in 2009, I had to go up to headquarters for that with Perry Turner as part of this to see if any of our stuff was compromised. And there were 30 companies that Google got in, that the Chinese government got into, and none of the companies wanted to talk about it because they had business in China.
Mm-hmm. So Karen Anderson on LinkedIn makes a good point. This is an important topic for this particular episode when we're talking about at home, right? Because we're kind of talking a lot of things. A lot of these deal with home, but so she, let me find word here, right here. So this is obviously, you talk about this a lot, Scott, right? I've seen you post this on LinkedIn many times with sextortion, right? Parents aren't paying attention to any of this, and it is a huge issue. I mean, there are farms of bad guys that this is what they do. Actually, they just arrested. I think I read Monday they just arrested 48 people who were doing this in Nigeria. It was a small, obviously one small group, but parents need to understand what their kids are getting into. And I tell you, I tell you, the parents who wake up when their kid kills themselves because of this, and then they wake up, but it's too late by then.
It's really a scary world out there because, I handled in Nashville, I was, the crimes against children supervisor. I remember in 2007 talking at an inner city school to a bunch of kids, 12-year-old kids. And I asked them, how many of you guys are on MySpace? And they almost all raised their hands. You had to be over 14 at the time. How many of you all knew more about computers than your parents? And 50% raised their hands. And I said, well, it's an inner city school. And the last time I did this, I asked middle schoolers, how many of you guys can do anything in the world you want on your smartphones and your parents don't even have a clue? And that was before TikTok came on. So I think now, parents, there's no user guide to being a parent. Let's think about it. We all do the best we can. But now you don't go anywhere without seeing kids sitting on their phones at 3, 4 years old, watching videos, watching movies and stuff, and completely being influenced by social media. But I want to go back to the tactical stuff on cyber and kind of bounce these around with you, Paul. Just because
before you do that, Scott, we do have a question. We've got a question. This is from TAB. I think he's watching on YouTube. I think would the best security maybe be no security? Well, my answer would be no. That's probably not the best security. I'm thinking, but go ahead, have at it.
No, it would not. Listen. Yeah, there are certain things that you really need to do.
This is yeah. You
Yeah,
made a good
no.
point.
I see where you're coming from, but look,
Mhm.
it's not even that. It's just that even if the things that I'm going to talk about is really not even network-based attacks. I'm not even
No.
ready to talk to people about tightening up your network. I want to sit here now and talk about maybe if I can go back in time and I have 5 or 10 minutes with my audience, these are the things that I would explain to them, and we'll go through each one of them. First one. This is what my victims didn't know. And this is going to apply to you and your family. And I'm only going to talk to you as someone who has to take care of senior parents and kids. And at age 56, my 21-year-old calls me. I'm his elderly parent. So, okay, here's the first one. Social engineering is the number one tool in the cyber criminals tool belt. But Scott, we have phishing training. And the question I'm going to ask everyone is, are you familiar with the 8 different types of social engineering? I love making up that question. It's a true question because let's really talk about what is social engineering. Social engineering is tricking you into doing something you normally wouldn't do. That's it. Bottom line, technology makes it easier. Email is only one very, very small portion. We have email. We have text messages. We have telephone calls and robocalls. We have QR codes. We have social media account takeovers. We have pop-ups. We have malvertising. I just had a woman call me up who lost $27,000 because she went to Google and typed in cell phone repair. And the first thing that came up was an ad put up by bad guys. And the last one is the good old business email compromise. So when you're sitting here talking to your employees or you're talking to people, are you aware of these scams? Darren, that's a lot. Well, Paul, that's a lot to process, isn't it?
It's absolutely a lot to process. But I think the social engineering perspective, like you said at the very beginning, is tricking you into doing something. And that's where people have to slow down, right? And people have to look at something and I always when I do presentations, and I'm sure you do the same thing, I always tell people, take 5 seconds, be inconvenient, think about, is this really accurate? And we're all going through business, we're all going through life at the speed that we want to go through, but we have to slow down and we have to stop. And I think that's the biggest piece as it relates to social engineering.
And it's hard, and the cyber criminals are killing us with it, Paul.
Yep. I agree. And you said something on your first truth was people don't think they're going to be a victim. And I always go back to Colonial Pipeline when the actual criminals came out and said, we didn't know who we were hitting. We just knew there was an exploit, and that's what we were going after. And that one, to me, I thought was a watershed moment, but it wasn't. And so I don't know when we get to there.
But in our families, in our personal lives, we're all going to have that watershed moment when something bad happens to us. So social engineering is the first one. Account compromise. That's all the bad guys need to do. They're trying to trick you to steal your username and password.
Right.
I sit with organizations all the time. I don't have the skill set like Darren to do risk assessments, but I do when I ask companies all the time. I go to, do we have a simple list of all your SaaS platforms that you have? Or if you ask someone at home, and this is the challenge that I want everyone out here, what are your mission critical platforms that you have at home that the cyber criminal got access to would destroy your life? And are you one of the 66% of the population who's using the same password for multiple platforms? So those are the first 3. Social engineering, account compromise. Are you using the same password for multiple platforms? And once we get to that, do we have a system to create and store passwords? And lastly, are we using...
I know that one.
All right.
Multi-factor authentication.
Very good.
Thanks.
Yeah. But really, it's not rocket science.
It's not. It's not.
You know, it's just, but it's really taking what you know here, that's sitting here, and putting it right over here. And that's the important part about this. And for anyone who's still here, Darren, at the end, I'm going to give these good people a free copy of my book and all of that stuff for the audio copy. Yes, Paul.
Can I have one of those too?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Even though Darren's book's better than mine, you know.
I still don't have one of
Darren
those either. So
Darren
I'm
was
working on it.
a teacher. Yes.
So
yeah,
Tab,
and the whole point is social engineering evolves. It's been around way before the Ponzi scam. That was the first major one. And I'm sure back in the days of the Roman Empire, someone was tricking somebody out of stealing a chariot or going back. I mean, there's always some form of social engineering, but technology makes it so easy to do. That's it. I mean, I can't even, before I'm going to sit here and talk to an organization, I'm like, are you doing these things?
and you got to talk to the people first. I mean, because the people make up the organization. The organization can only do so much, but the human element, the human factor, the people problem, that's always going to be there. And if you don't change those people individually, the company's kind of doesn't have a shot, right? Because you can put all the controls you want. One person can ruin it all.
Well, there you go. Karen Anderson. For some reason, her name doesn't come across in the stream. I can see it over here. She said Trojan horse, social engineering. Hey,
Yeah.
here's a present for you. Have it.
No, it's just we're dealing with the same issues that we were. I mean, I always joke. I'm like, look, the only difference between my presentation now and in 2016 is I charge for it, and no, and I used the term ransomware, business email compromise, and within the past 6 months, I have to use the terms artificial intelligence. So let me ask both of you, and I'll ask the audience first. In the game of race, is artificial intelligence in the world of cybercrime, or is it going to help us at prevention, or is it going to help the cyber criminals? Who's going to win the race?
Depends on who spends the most time dealing with it, right? I mean, let's be honest, the bad guys are going to spend all day figuring out how to use it for what they want. And the good guys won't figure out how to use it until after the bad guys deploy what they did. So the good guys have to figure out, okay, now how do I back engineer that to create a solution for it? That's going to be that, in my opinion, that's the problem. Paul?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it's going to confuse the good guys, because you used to be able to read an email and say, oh, well, that's clearly not true. That's clearly a scam because it's not written correctly. But now with AI and now with that, I mean, it can be written a little bit better. And I just think it complicates the whole issue on the winning side. And what is it? You may have said this before, Darren. I've heard many people say it. We have to be right 100% of the time. They only have to be right once. Right. Mm-hmm. And so the law of numbers says it's their game. We're just trying to play catch up.
Well, and Alfred says we need to catch up before we worry about winning. Let's define winning. Winning in my life is not having my family be the victim of cybercrime incident. You know, it's just that simple.
Well, the funny thing is, Scott, you and I both have stories of we got hit with social engineering. You're not so much, because it was more your son. Your son was doing that to due diligence with the NFT thing that you told me about.
I mean,
and mine. Go ahead.
No, mine was beautiful. It was the fact that my son was looking to buy an NFT, which I didn't know what the heck that was at the time, and it was probably 3 years ago, and he was on Discord. And all of a sudden, he got a link that they're ready to sell. They're ready, and it came from the administrator. Here, click on the link and transfer $225. And he transferred it to the wrong account. And here's the worst part, Paul. I was sitting with him when this happened. And here's what it was: fear of missing out, sense of urgency,
Yep.
the night of Thanksgiving, and all of that stuff. And that's why, when you're dealing with these things, you just have to make sure you're on the right communication channel. It was picture perfect.
So I'll ask the both of you. I'll ask the both of you this question, and I assume I know the answer, but I figure I'll ask it and you can expound on it. But is it important for companies to also educate their employees on how to keep their home safe, and by proxy, that will keep their business safe?
I have a canned
before
answer, Paul,
2020
so
or
go
after
ahead.
2020?
Yeah, either or.
Go ahead,
After,
Scott.
I guess after, right? Because now here's where we're at.
I
Go ahead,
talked to a
Scott.
lot of chief information security officers of very large organizations. They're too busy checking the box with the compliance regulations that are around today that they do not have time to think about that. They are underwater on compliance regulations. So they are not going to get to the point, and they are not going to be able to think about those types of things. It's just that simple.
And I think that's why you have to educate the individuals and let them know that you're a part of IT. Either whether you can spell it or not, you are a part of it, and you've got to do the things, and you've got to make it inconvenient for yourself. And that's the only way to kind of help the,
and you
the
have
bigger
to hit
group.
the right person. And,
Right.
this is what I figured out. I have just picked up 5 banking clients for training. So I asked both of you guys, Darren and Paul, who do you think my target audience is when I'm talking to a bank? Who in the bank do I want to talk to close a deal?
Go ahead, Paul.
I mean, to close a deal and getting it, it's the compliance people.
to provide cybersecurity awareness.
Yeah, it's the compliance people, it's the CIO, it's the ones making the decisions, but those are going to be the last ones you want to talk to. No?
Nope. Marketing people.
Marketing people, because I'm able to go in here at conferences, and I did one conference and I said, banks, I got great news for you. I said, the banks you guys are not getting hit as cybercrime victims. Give yourselves a round of applause. You're doing something right. They're only going after all of your end users. So do you have a responsibility? If I'm going to tell you that 90% of cybercrime victimizations could have been prevented, do you have a responsibility, or are you interested in building your brand and differentiating your brand by having me help you? And I hate to say it, but when I'm able to put things into that perspective, they're able to go, wow, that's a really great marketing initiative that we want to take through, because we want to differentiate ourselves and say, hey, look at us. I've been to bank conferences, Paul. I spoke at the Iowa Bankers Association. I spoke at the Florida Bankers Association, the North Carolina Bankers Association, and Tennessee. Bank technology people, no one's ever really taken me up on that, because they go like this. My thing is to make sure the controls in the network are all safe.
There's a difference in compliance and security.
Or marketing, but who would go? But go figure, Darren. I mean, marketing, but that's where you got to focus.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I knew the answer, so that's why I let you go first. Because I've heard that story before. So
maybe I'll just talk to Paul next time. Paul,
well,
whatever you want, Scott.
We're at the 45-minute point. As I like to say, we're here for a good time, not a long time. So, Scott, talk about your website. What can people get if they go there? Where do they go to find the free book?
Well, I live on LinkedIn. So if you just connect with me on LinkedIn and tell me that you saw me today, I will send you a link. Click on the link. I'm going to send you where you get access to my audio book. Glad I made you laugh, Paul. A copy of The Secret to Cybersecurity. If you're looking to read a good book by an FBI agent who worked a lot of high-level cases, put a lot of bad guys in jail. I'm not your guy. Darren Mott wrote a book that covers all of that stuff. Mine is just a simple plan to protect your family and business. And my website is cybersecuremindset.com. And that's where I push my initiatives. And what I try to do is give away all of my content, and as a result of giving away my content, companies call me up and say, hey, can you do that for me? And that's really been kind of pretty successful. I haven't had to get a real job in 7 years. Not that I had a real job beforehand with the FBI.
Well, Scott, thanks so much for coming on. I'm sure this is not the last time you'll be on the Tactical Cyber Podcast, as you are my go-to guest whenever I need something.
Well, I have Ray and Stacy on speed dial for you because you can replace me.
Sure, they're welcome to pop in if they want.
Paul, it was great to chat with you today.
Absolutely.
Darren, thank you. And for your audience, I mean, I think it's great what you guys are doing, and the conversations that you're having, just really so important.
Agreed.
Thanks, Paul. Or thanks, Scott. Sorry, thanks, Scott. All right. So, Paul, what do you got going this week? Anything cyber-wise of importance?
I mean, cyber-wise, a couple presentations, couple of conversations, and like Scott has said, I mean, it's about the constant drumbeat of telling people what they need to be doing, and hopefully you reach one. And that's my whole thing when we do presentations is if I can reach one person and they can do something different personally or within their business, then we're gaining, we're not winning. And I think that's just the biggest piece is the constant drumbeat. So if you're out there and you get the chance to listen to somebody talk about cybersecurity, go listen. Even if you've heard them before, some of it may be the same, but it doesn't hurt to also hear it again and again. And I think I've always said, if you ever get a chance to listen to somebody that's been on the federal law enforcement side, like Darren and like Scott and others, they can say things that somebody like myself can't. And I think it's always important to hear. And so just education is always my biggest thing. So that's what we've got going on. What about you, Darren?
Not much. I'm working on an assessment for a church. So I had my local church ask, hey, can you help us with our cybersecurity? So I'm starting down that road. So if there's any churches that need a cybersecurity assistance, let me know. I'll try to help you out there if I can. I do have my book available on Amazon, Get Cyber Smart, a user-friendly guide to protecting your family, your business, and yourself online. It is not at all expensive. And if you are already
now I need to get a book.
Well, this is I don't think I have anything written. This is yours right here. So you're sitting here. So next time you come to Huntsville, then we'll get it to you. Also doing the podcast. I got to do the podcast after this one, and a new newsletter. I have a new newsletter starting on Friday called Get Cyber Smart Behind the Screens. So it's going to be basically 3 topics. Kind of like a 3-screen setup. So there's 3 screens. That's kind of the joke behind it. So that's available on Substack if you want to go find me over there, Cyber Guy at Substack. And as always, if you have thoughts, questions, or comments for this podcast or any of the other podcasts I do, feel free to hit me up, Darren at thecyberguy.com. Paul, you're in charge of the topic for the next podcast for Tactical Cyber. Oh, and one thing I meant to ask. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say I'll be prepared for the next topic and the next guest.
Yeah. Okay. And so when you're doing your presentations, you have a Tactical Cyber slide on your presentations?
No, I do. I had to go and change it because I used to have a slide on self-education, and the slide on self-education talked about the Cyber Guy and a couple others, and we've had to change it now to include Tactical Cyber because I think self-education you just can't do it enough. So listening to podcasts, listening to people's opinions, that's the way to educate yourself around cybersecurity. So yes, I do have one of those slides.
All right, great. Well, Paul, thanks again for helping me on this
Always
journey.
A pleasure.
We'll be back again in a couple of weeks talking more about all of this stuff. And for those of you who have listened or were watching on LinkedIn or on YouTube, thanks so much for taking the time to listen to us pontificate on these things. If you have thoughts or questions, email me right there, Darren at thecyberguy.com. Check out any of my other podcasts. Check out Paul's podcast, and just email us if you have questions. With that, as you go through the rest of your week, know that knowledge is protection. If you can understand the threats targeting, you can proceed wisely. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back again soon with more Tactical Cyber.